They told her she didn't belong there, that she was too fragile for combat, too delicate. When the ambush came, no one expected her to survive, least of all command, who started processing her death notification by day 3, declared missing, presumed dead until day 30 when she walked back into base on her own 2 feet, carrying the most valuable intelligence the military had seen in years. The truth is, she had never been fragile at all. She had just been watching, waiting. She never needed recognition, but she deserved it more than anyone else. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story resonates with you, consider subscribing to see more untold stories of extraordinary strength hiding in plain sight. Dawn crept over forward operating base Epsilon, painting the dusty compound in hues of amber and gold. Lieutenant Callista Voss moved with quiet precision through the awakening camp, her slight frame and measured steps causing her to blend seamlessly into the background of the bustling military operation. While other soldiers called out greetings or complaints about the early hour, Callista worked in silence, checking her gear with methodical attention to detail that few noticed and even fewer appreciated. Sergeant Major Bryson's voice cut through the morning air like a blade, sharp and commanding as he barked orders at a group of soldiers preparing vehicles for the day's mission. His eyes swept over Callista without acknowledgement before moving on, a dismissal so routine she no longer registered it. Inside the command tent, senior officers huddled over maps spread across a makeshift table, their hushed tones carrying just far enough for Callista to catch fragments as she organized her equipment nearby. "Voss doesn't belong here," Major Harding muttered, tapping a finger against the map. "Too bookish, too fragile for this kind of deployment." Colonel Saunders sighed. Command insisted. "Something about exceptional tactical analysis skills." "Skills on paper mean nothing out here," Harding replied. "She'll crack at the first sign of trouble. Mark my words." Callista continued her preparations, her expression unchanged, save for the almost imperceptible tightening of her jaw. She had heard variations of this conversation throughout her career, the words changing slightly, but the sentiment remaining constant. Too small, too quiet, too delicate. The judgments had long since lost their sting, but their persistence remained an unwelcome companion. Captain Reeves strode into the tent, confidence radiating from his broad shoulders as he called the team to attention for the mission briefing. Maps were adjusted, soldiers gathered, and Callista took her position at the edge of the group, notebook ready. "Listen up," Reeves began, outlining the reconnaissance mission with practiced authority. "We'll be moving through Zone 7, gathering intel on suspected enemy movements here and here." His finger jabbed at the map. "Minimal resistance expected in the northern corridor." Callista studied the map, then spoke, her voice soft but precise. "Sir, satellite imagery from 2 days ago showed increased activity in the northern sector. 3 new heat signatures consistent with observation posts." The room fell silent. Reeves blinked, momentarily caught off guard before recovering with a dismissive wave. "Noted, Lieutenant, but command's assessment suggests those were temporary encampments, likely abandoned by now." He continued the briefing without pause. The correction brushed aside like an inconvenient insect. Across the tent, Private Thorne caught Callista's eye and offered a subtle nod of acknowledgement. Later, as soldiers filed into the mess hall, he sat beside her while others gave her a wide berth. "They don't get it," he said, tearing into his bread ration. "You see things differently." Callista offered a rare half-smile as she continued organizing her pack, adding items that drew curious and sometimes mocking glances: a small mirror, a worn guide to local plant life, length of handmade cord fashioned from materials most would discard. "Is that a plant book?" Corporal Drake asked, passing by with exaggerated incredul. "Planning a nature hike, Voss." "Something like that," Callista replied, neither defending her choices nor explaining them. A brief memory surfaced. Training exercises where she had consistently excelled in survival scenarios, identifying resources others overlooked, creating solutions from seemingly nothing. Her evaluations had noted her exceptional performance. Yet somehow these achievements never translated into respect from her peers. They remained invisible, overshadowed by her physical stature and quiet demeanor. As the unit prepared to move out the following morning, Callista secured her gear with practiced efficiency. The weight of her pack settled comfortably against her shoulders as she took her position in formation. Ahead lay Zone 7, a densely forested area in contested territory, where the mission objective was to gather intelligence on enemy movements without detection. The first few hours passed without incident as they navigated the increasingly difficult terrain, while others focused forward, eyes on the path ahead, and conversation minimal but present. Callista's attention moved constantly, registering details most would miss. Disturbed foliage that didn't match wind patterns, an unusual silence where birds should be calling, fresh boot prints partially concealed beneath scattered leaves. They approached a narrow valley flanked by steep ridges, the path constricting between natural stone walls. Callista paused, studying the terrain with increased focus. "We should adjust our route," she suggested quietly to Drake, who had point position. "The valley creates a natural bottleneck." Drake scoffed. "Command approved this path after thorough analysis. Lieutenant, stop being paranoid and keep moving." Callista's eyes continued scanning the ridge lines as they entered the valley. Her posture shifted subtly, tension visible only in her eyes and the slight adjustment of her grip on her weapon. When they reached the narrowest point, she made one final attempt. "Sir," she addressed Captain Reeves directly this time. "Request permission to scout the eastern ridge before proceeding." "Denied," Lieutenant Reeves replied without turning. "We maintain schedule and formation." The first explosion came from their left flank, followed immediately by another on their right. The coordinated attack turning the narrow valley into a kill zone in seconds. Communications jammed instantly as gunfire erupted from concealed positions along both ridge lines. "Ambush! Take cover!" Reeves shouted, just before taking a hit that sent him sprawling behind a boulder. Chaos erupted as the unit scattered for whatever meager protection the terrain offered. Through the smoke and debris, Callista moved differently than before, her previous careful movements replaced by decisive action. No hesitation, no fear, just focused response to the threat. Private Thorne took a round to the shoulder, the impact spinning him into the open. Before anyone could react, Callista was there, dragging him to cover behind an outcropping, applying pressure to the wound with one hand while returning fire with the other. "Stay down," she instructed, her voice calm amid the cacophony of battle. "Apply pressure here." She guided his hand to the wound before assessing their position. "When I move, count to 30, then make for that fallen tree line. The angle protects from their primary firing positions." "What about you?" Thorne asked through gritted teeth. Callista didn't answer, already moving to where two other wounded soldiers had taken cover. She helped stabilize them, issued similar instructions, then disappeared into the thickening smoke as the enemy forces closed in. It was the last time anyone from the unit would see her for 30 days. 2 days later, Colonel Winters stood in the command center at Base Epsilon, face grim as he reviewed the after-action report. The mission had been a catastrophic failure. 3 soldiers dead, 5 wounded, and 1 missing in action. "Lieutenant Callista Voss. No sign of her in the recovery sweep?" he asked, although he already knew the answer. "No, sir," the intelligence officer replied. "Given the enemy presence and the time frame since the ambush, survival probability is categorized as minimal." Winters nodded, reaching for the death notification paperwork with mechanical efficiency. His pen hovered briefly over the line for next of kin. "Shame," he murmured. "She wasn't built for this." The words were routine, expected, like so many others that had followed Callista throughout her career. Too fragile, too delicate, not built for combat. The colonel signed the form, effectively erasing Lieutenant Voss from the roster of active personnel with a single stroke. Days turned into weeks. Search efforts, already pre-functor, were officially abandoned. Weather conditions worsened with heavy rains making the terrain even more treacherous. Command issued the final declaration. Recovery impossible. Lieutenant Voss officially classified as killed in action. A memorial service was prepared. Callista's sparse personal effects were boxed up by soldiers who barely knew her. A photograph of distant mountains. Books on survival tactics and local topography. Notebooks filled with observations that had seemed trivial to others, but which she had recorded with characteristic attention to detail. Private Thorne, arm in a sling but recovering, lingered over the box. "She saved my life," he told the chaplain preparing the service. "Got me to cover, showed me how to position to avoid the worst of the fire. I made it back because of her." The chaplain nodded sympathetically, but the words made little impact on the official narrative. Lieutenant Callista Voss, too delicate for combat, predictably unable to survive when real danger presented itself. On the 30th night after the ambush, Specialist Rivera manned the northeast perimeter guard post, fighting boredom as rain finally cleared after 3 days of downpour. Movement at the edge of the floodlight's reach snapped him to attention. A shadow detached from the darkness beyond the fence, approaching with a halting gait that suggested injury. "Halt! Identify yourself," Rivera called out, weapon raised. When no response came, his finger tensed on the trigger. The figure continued forward, now close enough for the lights to reveal mud-caked fatigues and a frame so gaunt it barely resembled a human soldier. Then the light caught her face, and Rivera nearly dropped his weapon in shock. "Lieutenant Voss." The base erupted into controlled chaos as word spread. Medical teams rushed forward with a stretcher, but Callista refused to lie down. Despite visible exhaustion, she remained standing, somehow both utterly spent and unervingly steady. As Colonel Winters approached, disbelief etched into his features. "Lieutenant Voss, how?" he began, but words failed him. Without speaking, Callista reached into her tattered jacket and withdrew a worn journal, its pages swollen from dampness, but intact. She placed it on the nearest surface, opening to reveal page after page of detailed maps, sketches of enemy positions, supply routes, patrol patterns, weapons caches, all documented in precise handwriting that grew increasingly cramped as she conserved paper. Major Landon, the intelligence officer, flipped through the journal with increasing amazement. This is everything we've been trying to get for months." His finger traced a particularly detailed map. "These positions weren't even on our radar." "How did you?" I watched, Callista said simply, her voice from disuse, but steady. "I listened. I moved only when necessary." Colonel Winters stared at her, seeing for the first time something that had always been there, but never recognized. A soldier of extraordinary capability hidden beneath a quiet exterior that had been mistaken for weakness. Slowly, formally, he raised his hand in salute. "Lieutenant, the United States military owes you a debt." Around them, Sergeant Major Bryson, Captain Reeves, and others who had dismissed her stood witness. Shame evident in their postures. The realization dawned collectively. They had fundamentally misunderstood what strength looked like, had missed recognizing capability because it didn't present itself in the form they expected. Callista returned the salute with perfect form despite her exhaustion. When she finally spoke again, her voice carried an authority it hadn't possessed before. Or perhaps more accurately, an authority others hadn't been willing to hear. "I did what I was trained to do," she said. "What I was always capable of doing." The medical team guided Callista to the infirmary despite her reluctance. Her body bore the evidence of her ordeal. Sunburn across her face and neck, dirt embedded in her skin, a makeshift bandage around her lower leg, and a frame noticeably thinner than 30 days prior. Yet her eyes remained clear and alert, scanning rooms and personnel with the same quiet assessment that had once been dismissed as timidity. Dr. Ezrin approached with practiced caution. "Lieutenant, we need to assess your condition after the debrief," Callista replied, her voice raspy but firm. "That can wait," Colonel Winters interjected, entering the infirmary with Major Landon close behind, the journal clutched in his hands. "Medical evaluation takes priority." Callista met his gaze directly. "The information has time sensitivity. Some positions will be relocated within 48 hours. A silent exchange passed between the colonel and the doctor before Winters nodded reluctantly. Abbreviated debrief, then full medical. They relocated to a secure room where Callista sat straight back despite obvious fatigue. The intelligence team assembled hastily, faces showing varying degrees of disbelief and curiosity. The journal lay open on the table between them, its pages a testament to survival few had thought possible. "Start from the ambush," Major Landon prompted. Callista's account came in precise, economical sentences. After helping wounded soldiers find cover, she'd recognized the ambush as a practiced operation likely to include a sweep team to eliminate survivors. Rather than retreat with others, she made a calculated decision to move deeper into contested territory, reasoning that pursuit would expect the opposite. The initial 48 hours were highest risk, she explained, indicating a rough map she'd drawn the first night. I established 3 false trails before finding suitable observation shelter here. Her finger touched a point near a Rigel line that hadn't appeared on their original mission maps. Colonel Winters leaned forward. You intentionally went further into enemy territory rather than attempting to return to base. Correct. Based on previous patterns, enemy forces would establish a containment perimeter, expecting retreating personnel. Forward movement presented better survival probability. Tactical decision-making, not panic. Strategy, not fear. The officers exchanged glances as their understanding of Lieutenant Voss began a fundamental shift. As dawn approached, exhaustion finally began to show in Callista's responses. Dr. Ezrin intervened, insisting on medical attention. The intelligence team reluctantly adjourned, but not before Colonel Winters issued new orders based on Callista's intelligence, mobilizing teams to take advantage of the unexpected windfall of information. In the privacy of the medical bay, Callista finally allowed herself to lie down. As Dr. Ezrin cleaned wounds and administered fluids, the true extent of her journey became evident in her physical condition. A fractured ankle improperly healed, numerous lacerations treated with improvised methods, significant weight loss, and signs of exposure. How did you manage with this ankle? The doctor asked, genuine awe in her voice. Fashioned a brace from tree bark and paracord. Limited movement to essential tasks. Most people wouldn't have been able to walk, let alone evade capture. Callista's eyes had already closed, fatigue finally claiming her. Most people underestimate what they can endure when necessary, she murmured before sleep overtook her. While Callista slept, her journal sparked frantic activity throughout the base. Intelligence officers pored over her meticulous notes, confirming positions through satellite imagery where available. Maps were updated, operation plans revised, all based on the observations of a single lieutenant who had been written off as too delicate for combat. The following day brought the first of many debriefing sessions. As Callista's strength gradually returned, the full account of her 30 days emerged through her testimony and the detailed journal entries. After establishing her initial shelter, she had created a systematic approach to survival and intelligence gathering. Each day followed a pattern. Secure necessities at dawn and dusk when patrols were lightest. Observe enemy movements during peak hours. Document everything during the quietest periods. I used the mirror to signal a drone on day 7, she explained, demonstrating with her hands, but it either wasn't noticed or couldn't be acted upon. Major Landon nodded grimly. No drone footage was flagged. The operator likely dismissed it as light reflection. Another opportunity missed because her presence had been discounted. The survival aspects of her ordeal emerged in equal detail. The plant guide had proven invaluable, allowing her to identify safe food sources and medicinal plants to treat her injuries and prevent infection. She'd created water collection systems from materials in abandoned structures, fashioned weapons for hunting small game, and developed camouflage techniques that rendered her nearly invisible during daylight movement. The local shepherds proved unexpectedly useful, she noted. During one session, their movements indicated safe passages between observation points. Enemy forces largely ignored them. Captain Reeves, still recovering from his own injuries, but insistent on attending the debriefs, shook his head in amazement. You tracked shepherd movements to map patrol gaps. That's not in any field manual I've read. It's basic pattern recognition, Callista replied without emphasis, as though the approach were obvious rather than innovative. As days passed, the intelligence Callista had gathered proved increasingly valuable. 3 operations launched based on her information succeeded without casualties. Enemy supply lines identified in her notes were disrupted, and 2 high V-value targets were located exactly where she had documented their routine movements. 2 weeks after her return, Colonel Winters called Callista to his office. The wall behind him displayed maps annotated with information from her journal, now expanded upon and verified through subsequent operations. The Pentagon has taken interest in your case, Lieutenant, he said without preamble. Not just the intelligence you gathered, but your methods, your survival techniques. Callista remained silent, waiting for him to continue. They're recommending combination, Distinguished Service Cross at minimum. He studied her with new eyes. Quite a leap from being presumed dead. Sir, Callista began carefully. The combination is unnecessary. It's not about necessity, Lieutenant. It's about recognition of extraordinary service. He hesitated, and perhaps about correcting an institutional blind spot. A knock at the door interrupted them as Sergeant Major Bryson entered, stopping short when he saw Callista. The Sergeant Major's demeanor had undergone a noticeable transformation since her return, shifting from dismissal to something approaching respect, though discomfort still lingered in his posture. "The after-action reports you requested, sir," he said, placing a folder on the desk. He turned to Callista, executing a crisp salute. "Lieutenant." After he departed, Colonel Winters leaned back in his chair. "That's new. People see what they expect to see," Callista observed quietly. "And what did we expect to see with you, Lieutenant? Someone too small, too quiet, too bookish, too delicate." Winters nodded slowly. "And now they see what was always there, just in a different package than expected." The awards ceremony was held 3 weeks after Callista's return. The base gathered in formal assembly as commendations were presented not just to her, but to all who had served in the failed mission, including posthumous honors for those who hadn't returned. When Callista's name was called, the applause carried a different quality than it had for others. Charged with something beyond respect, approaching awe, she accepted the medal with composed dignity, visibly uncomfortable with the attention, but understanding its necessity. Captain Reeves, still using a cane but insistent on standing for the ceremony, approached her afterward. "I need to say this publicly," he began, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "I misjudged you, Lieutenant Voss. I saw what I expected to see, not what was actually there." He extended his hand. "I was wrong." Callista accepted the handshake with a nod, neither dismissing his apology nor dwelling on it. Private Thorne, his arms still in a sling, but healing well, joined them. "They should know what you did before you disappeared," he said. "The captain wasn't the only one you saved." The small gathering grew quiet as Thorne recounted what others hadn't known. How Callista had moved through the ambush chaos with tactical precision, helping 3 wounded soldiers reach protective cover, creating makeshift tourniquets, and providing covering fire that allowed them to eventually join the main retreat. "We made it out because of her," Thorne concluded. While the rest of us were still processing what was happening, she was already 3 steps ahead. The story spread through the base, transforming the narrative around Callista's survival. What had initially been viewed as miraculous luck shifted in collective understanding to recognize skill. The whispers changed. "They say she traversed 20 m of enemy territory with a fractured ankle. Reportedly identified 3 previously unknown enemy outposts. Command says her intel is the most valuable single-source material they've received this deployment. She calculated patrol patterns based on where birds weren't singing." Some embellishments emerged as they always do in military legends, but the core truth remained unassailable. Lieutenant Callista Voss had done what no one believed possible, not through supernatural ability, but through the very qualities that had been dismissed as weaknesses. A week after the ceremony, Colonel Winters found Callista working late in the Tactical Operations Center, reviewing new intelligence against her notes. "May I speak with you, Lieutenant?" They moved to a quieter corner, away from others working the night shift. "I've been reviewing your file," Winters said. "Your performance evaluations from training were exemplary. Top marks in tactical assessment, resource management, observational skills. Yet somehow those strengths never translated into appropriate field assignments." Callista remained silent, her expression neutral. "Why didn't you ever correct them?" he asked finally. "Make them see who you really were." She considered the question with characteristic thoroughness. Would they have believed me or just seen what they expected to see? The colonel had no immediate answer for that. "People interpret silence according to their preconceptions," Callista continued. "To some, it suggests weakness or uncertainty. To others, careful observation. The difference isn't in the silence itself, but in the assumptions brought to it." Winters nodded slowly. "And now there's evidence that can't be dismissed." She gestured to the operations board where 3 new missions based on her intelligence were being planned. Results speak when words might not be heard. News of Callista's achievements spread beyond the base, reaching the training academy where new recruits heard her story with rapt attention. Female recruits especially stood taller, spoke more confidently, recognizing a path forward that didn't require conforming to traditional expectations of what strength looked like. Major Etrick, reviewing training protocols in light of recent field experiences, added a new module focused on observational skills and pattern recognition, areas previously considered secondary to more physical aspects of combat preparation. The course materials included case studies, one prominently featuring Lieutenant Voss's 30 days behind enemy lines. Traditional metrics of combat readiness have proven insufficient, the introduction read. This course examines how alternative skill sets contribute to mission success in adverse conditions. For Callista, the attention remained an uncomfortable fit. She continued her duties with the same quiet focus that had always characterized her work, neither seeking recognition nor avoiding the responsibilities it brought. The difference now lay not in her approach, but in how others received it, the respect afforded to her assessments, the weight given to her observations. 1 month after her return, she received new orders, temporary reassignment, to develop specialized training protocols based on her experience. The directive came directly from command headquarters, bypassing the usual chain that had previously overlooked her capabilities. Colonel Winters presented the orders personally. They want your perspective integrated into standard preparation for reconnaissance units. Your methods, your way of seeing. My methods aren't special, Callista replied. They're just different from what's been prioritized. And that difference nearly got missed entirely, Winters acknowledged. We can't afford to make that mistake again. The military training facility at Fort Harlow bustled with activity as a new class of recruits moved through morning exercises. Inside the main briefing hall, senior officers and training specialists gathered for the unveiling of revised protocols that had been 6 months in development. At the center of these changes stood Lieutenant Callista Voss, her formerly slight frame now carrying a different kind of presence that commanded attention without demanding it. The updated reconnaissance training program incorporates multidisciplinary approaches to survival and intelligence gathering, Callista explained, her quiet voice nonetheless reaching every corner of the room. Traditional physical metrics remain important, but will be balanced with equally rigorous development of observational skills, resource management, and adaptive thinking. Colonel Winters, visiting from headquarters to oversee the implementation, watched with satisfaction as Callista navigated the presentation with the same precision she had shown in the field. The officers in attendance, initially skeptical, leaned forward with increasing interest as she outlined specific scenarios drawn from real operations, including her own 30-day survival. Questions? She concluded after walking them through the comprehensive revisions. Major Thornfield raised his hand. These protocols represent a significant shift from established doctrine. Lieutenant, what evidence supports their effectiveness beyond your individual experience? It was the question Callista had anticipated. The same doubt she had encountered throughout her career reformulated in more professional terms. Without responding immediately, she activated the wall screen behind her, displaying a series of comparative statistics. 6 trial units implemented partial protocols over the past 4 months, she explained, indicating the graphs. Successful intelligence collection increased by 37%. Casualty rates decreased by 22%. Adaptation to unexpected field conditions improved across all metrics. The data spoke with undeniable clarity. Results, not theory. Evidence, not assumption. The room fell quiet as the implications settled. Implementation begins with the current training cycle, Colonel Winters announced, stepping forward. Lieutenant Voss will oversee the transition and provide ongoing assessment. As the briefing concluded, Captain Reeves, now fully recovered and assigned to the training facility, approached Callista. The awkwardness that had characterized their initial reunion after her return had gradually transformed into a working relationship built on newfound respect. The urban environment scenarios need refinement, he noted, referencing a section of the presentation. My team can assist with that component if you're willing. I'd appreciate the input, Callista replied. It was a small exchange, but representative of the larger shift that had occurred, where once her suggestions would have been overruled without consideration, now collaboration was offered freely. Later that afternoon, Callista observed field exercises from the edge of the training ground, noting how instructors implemented the new methodologies with varying degrees of comfort. Her attention fixed on a group struggling with a resource allocation challenge, particularly on a recruit named Specialist Niara, who stood apart from the others, clearly frustrated but not engaging. Callista moved closer, listening as the team argued over approach. "We need to secure the high ground first," insisted a tall recruit with a commanding presence. "The water sour's priority," countered another. "Without hydration, position means nothing." Throughout the debate, Niara remained silent, studying the terrain map with focused intensity that went unnoticed by others. When she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet the team continued talking over her. Callista recognized the pattern immediately. "Hold," she called, approaching the group. Specialist Niara was speaking. The team fell silent, attention shifting uncomfortably to the slender recruit who seemed to shrink under the sudden focus. Callista nodded encouragement. "Proceed, Specialist." Nara cleared her throat. "There's a seasonal creek bed here." She indicated a faint line on the map others had overlooked. "It won't show as a water source now, but the vegetation patterns suggest groundwater close to the surface. We could access water while maintaining cover from these rock formations, then establish position on the secondary ridge with better visibility and less exposure." The team stared at the map, then at Nara, reevaluating both. "Implement the specialist's approach," Callista instructed. "Document results." As she walked away, Callista overheard one recruit whisper to Niara, "How did you spot that?" "I was looking at what wasn't marked, not just what was," came the reply. Later that evening, Callista found Niara working alone in the tactics room, reviewing terrain models with the same intense focus she'd shown earlier. "Your solution was sound," Callista said by way of greeting. Nara straightened. "Thank you, Lieutenant. I should have spoken up sooner." "Why didn't you?" The specialist hesitated. "Previous experience suggested my input would be dismissed." Callista nodded, understanding implicit in the gesture. "Strength isn't always loud," she said simply. "Sometimes it's in what you notice when everyone else is talking." Nara studied her with new recognition. "You're her, aren't you? The lieutenant who survived 30 days behind enemy lines alone." "I'm the one who returned," Callista corrected. "There were others equally capable who didn't have the same opportunities or circumstances. They say you changed how the entire command structure evaluates field readiness." "Not me," Callista replied. "Results did that. Data speaks more convincingly than any individual." She moved to the terrain model Nara had been studying. "Tell me what you see here that others might miss." The conversation that followed lasted nearly an hour, focusing not on Callista's experiences, but on Niara's observations, strengthening the specialist's confidence in her own unique perspective. It was the first of many such exchanges that would occur over the coming months as Callista identified others whose strengths lay in areas traditionally undervalued in combat assessment. 3 months into the training implementation, Colonel Winters returned for a formal evaluation. The results exceeded even optimistic projections. Units trained under the revised protocols demonstrated exceptional adaptability in simulated crisis scenarios, particularly in situations requiring resource conservation and intelligence gathering under adverse conditions. "The Pentagon is taking notice," Winters informed Callista as they reviewed the data. "There's discussion of implementing elements of your program across all branches, starting with special operations training." Callista acknowledged this with characteristic reserve. "The methods aren't revolutionary. They're just balanced differently than traditional approaches, which is precisely what makes them valuable," Winters countered. "We've been training for one type of strength while overlooking others equally critical to mission success." He studied her with thoughtful assessment. "Your next assignment has been finalized." The orders detailed her promotion to captain and reassignment to lead a specialized reconnaissance unit incorporating graduates from her training program. The team would focus on high-value intelligence gathering in contested territories, utilizing the balanced approach to combat readiness that Callista had helped develop. "Is this what you want?" Winters asked, unusually concerned with her preference rather than simply issuing the assignment. Callista considered the question seriously. "It's where I can be most effective," she answered finally. "And yes, it's what I want." The unit assembled 2 weeks later. A diverse team selected not for conformity to traditional combat archetypes, but for complementary capabilities across the spectrum Callista had identified as crucial to mission success. Specialist Niara was among them, her observational skills having developed into a formidable asset during training. Their first mission briefing carried none of the dismissive undertones that had characterized Callista's earlier deployments. Each team member's input was considered with equal weight, their various strengths recognized as essential components of the unit's overall capability. As they prepared for deployment, Captain Reeves approached Callista one final time. "I've been tasked with documenting the training methodology for wider implementation," he explained. "There's interest in understanding what allowed you to survive those 30 days when others wouldn't have." Callista secured her equipment before responding. "It wasn't extraordinary ability," she said finally. "It was applying skills I already had in ways others hadn't considered valuable. Watching, waiting, adapting. Skills we almost missed entirely," Reeves acknowledged. "Skills that exist in many who haven't been given the opportunity to demonstrate them," she corrected. "Look for them in quiet corners, in careful questions, in those who see differently rather than less." The conversation remained with Reeves long after Callista's unit departed. Its influence appeared in the training documentation he eventually produced, which emphasized identifying and developing diverse combat readiness profiles rather than forcing all soldiers to conform to a single ideal. 6 months later, Callista's unit returned from their third successful deployment, having gathered critical intelligence with minimal engagement and 0 casualties. Their approach had proven so effective that 2 additional units had been formed following their model, with more planned as suitable personnel were identified and trained. The cultural shift within the base was subtle but unmistakable. Assessment of ability increasingly focused on demonstrated results rather than conformity to expectations. Physical training remained rigorous but was complemented by equally demanding development of observational skills, tactical thinking, and resource management. Quiet voices received the same attention as commanding ones, their input evaluated on merit rather than delivery. In a private moment between missions, Colonel Winters found Callista reviewing intelligence reports in the command center. "The program is expanding faster than anticipated," he noted. 5 more bases implementing next quarter. "Your methods are changing the entire approach to field readiness." Callista nodded, accepting this without visible reaction, though the significance wasn't lost on her. "There's something I've wanted to ask you," Winters continued. "During those 30 days, was there ever a moment when you thought you wouldn't make it back?" She considered the question with her usual thoroughness. "There were moments when the probability seemed low," she allowed. "But I never stopped calculating the next step, the next observation point, the next opportunity. You never gave up." "I continued functioning according to my training and abilities," she corrected. "The same as any soldier would." Winter smiled slightly. "Not any soldier, Captain. That's rather the point." The following week brought a new class of recruits to Fort Harlow. Among them, Callista noticed several who carried themselves with the same reserved watchfulness that had once marked her as unsuitable for combat. Where previously they might have been marginalized or pushed to conform, now they were identified early for specialized development tracks that recognized their unique capabilities. During an assessment exercise, Callista observed a particularly quiet recruit being challenged by an instructor. "You've been watching rather than participating, Specialist Amari," the instructor noted. "Care to explain your approach?" The recruit straightened. "I was identifying pattern discrepancies in the scenario, sir. The presented threat doesn't match the terrain features or local population behaviors." Elaborate. As the specialist outlined observations that had escaped notice by more vocal team members, Callista saw recognition dawn in the instructor's expression. Another perspective that would once have been overlooked, now actively sought and developed. In the Field Operations Center, Callista's team prepared for their next deployment. The atmosphere differed markedly from her earlier experiences. Each member moved with quiet confidence, respected for their specific contributions to the unit's capability. They reviewed intelligence together, each offering insights from their particular perspective, building a comprehensive understanding no single viewpoint could provide. "Insertion point alternatives," Captain asked Lieutenant Mercer, the team's terrain specialist. Callista indicated 3 options on the map. Primary approach here, utilizing the river bend for cover. Alternatives based on conditions upon arrival. Her leadership style remained economical in words, but expansive in consideration, creating space for each team member's strengths. As they gathered their gear for departure, Specialist Niara, now a seasoned operator, fell into step beside Callista. 3 deployments ago, I wouldn't have believed I belonged here, she admitted quietly. "You belonged," Callista replied. "The system just hadn't learned to recognize it yet." Callista led her team across the tarmac toward the waiting transport, each member moving with the confidence of those who understood their value, who had been seen for their true capabilities rather than judged by superficial metrics. The respect they carried wasn't based on volume or stature, but on proven effectiveness and mutual recognition of complementary strengths. As the transport prepared for departure, Callista gave a nod rather than a speech. They understood. In that simple gesture lay the essence of what had changed, not just for her, but for an entire approach to combat readiness. True strength had never been about appearing powerful, but about being effective when it mattered most. The quiet ones, the watchers, the thinkers, finally recognized not as too delicate for combat, but as essential to its success. The transport lifted off, carrying a team that represented the beginning of a fundamental shift in military thinking, led by a woman who had never sought to prove herself, but whose actions had spoken. With irrefutable clarity. Not too delicate, after all, but precisely what had been needed all along.